Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching KTN Prime, and tonight we're discussing issues around Ruto's delicate economic balancing act between China and the US. Today, the United States House of Representatives has approved legislation to extend African Growth and Opportunity Act AGOA through 2028, with the bill now set to proceed to the Senate. Of course, this particular development being very critical because we have seen the US House of Representatives vote come amid broader trade alignments by Kenya, where President William Ruto delayed a signing proposed agreement with China earlier this month under pressure, of course, from the United States as Kenya balances its trade relationships with the two largest economic partners. Before we took a break, we were looking at, sort of like we're just trying to map out which way should Kenya go, given that the US is very categorical. If you're trading with the US, it's exclusively the US. And like you said earlier, just before we took a break, Sheila, you said it's very important for a country, not just Kenya, any country, to have many trade partners. But when one trade partner seems to dictate how far you can go in terms of your partnerships, what does that mean for a country like Kenya? So let's just understand, when it comes to China's trade agreements, what is China offering to Kenya? Of course, this being one of the reasons why the US feels compelled to step in. And we know about the early harvest deal with Kenya, that's China and Kenya, the tariff cuts on exports, that's on tea, avocados, coffee, fish, and the goal in this case of reducing or cutting the tariffs is to reduce Kenya's trade deficit with Beijing. Also, more than this is 20 side deals were also negotiated across manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. Like you mentioned rightfully, Sheila, the AGOA, and I believe Odhiambo you've also mentioned, AGOA is very critical for Kenya, especially when it comes to the textile industry and agriculture partly. But I just want us to understand, which way should Kenya go? East or west? That's a question we're asking today. Given the circumstances that Kenya is finding itself in between two global economies, which way should Kenya go? Let me begin with you, Odhiambo.
Well, as I had mentioned earlier, we cannot restrict ourselves to the Americans. Of course, what the Americans are to us is more significant and means more. And that's the numbers I was trying to give you. In terms of trade, they are 3 times what China gives. I mean, they give us 3 times what the Chinese give us. In terms of investments, they give us double what the Chinese give us. In terms of aid, they have done a lot more than the Chinese have done. In terms of just influence, global influence within organizations like the IMF. You know that the IMF has been at the core of our economic recovery process since the days of Uhuru Kenyatta. And so they are a partner you cannot ignore. But we are in a multipolar world where, yes, there is one big brother called the United States of America. But there are other players in the field. China has come strongly. India is here. Russia is here. You cannot, therefore, say that your trade will be dependent on one partner. And so what the Americans are asking for is impractical. Whether in terms of law or in terms of international relations or in terms of just pure good old economics. It's impractical. We must do business with China. And partly because what the Chinese are giving us is a market for agricultural products. And they're also giving us technology. Given climate change, population numbers, as population increases, the size of arable land reduces, agriculture might not be the future of our economic well-being. But as it is right now, it is what will launch us into that future. And so what the Chinese are offering is a market for what we have now. And they are also giving us opportunity to access technology that will launch us into the future we want. That is not something we can wish away merely on account of the geopolitical differences between Washington and China. So for me, it's not a question of who, it's a question of How do we engage with both parties so that then we can move forward? Collectively, if a conversation, and I think that's what Trump is trying to avoid, if a conversation were to be initiated by AU, and AU were to tell the Americans that, look, if you want us to forsake the Chinese trade deals that we have, because it's not just the early harvest. China also has a trade deal with EAC. China also has a trade deal with COMESA. And so if, for example, the Americans wanted us to forsake all those trade deals, then what are they offering on the table? It needs to be clear that they are willing to share technology, that they are willing to expand their market and develop the local production economy so that then this production economy can feed that market properly. If they are unwilling to, quote-unquote, babysit developing economies in Africa, then they should be able to allow us to consider our options here and there.
You know, when you look at the response from the government today, of course, coming from the Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs, that's Korir C. Onge, one of the things he mentioned is that Kenya is in response to this development about AGOA extending. The response coming was that Kenya is also working with Washington to both extend AGOA and explore a more permanent trade framework. Is this even possible, Sheila? Because the AGOA extension, like we mentioned earlier on, it's showing that it's about 3 years. Is there a possibility that we can have a more permanent trade framework with the US?
I think what we need to do first is we need to look at Kenya first. Well, let's get inspired by America a little bit and look at what are our economic challenges trade-wise. What gaps are we trying to meet? Because what Kenya is going through today, we're going through an economic revolution, if you ask me. We have a population, over 75% of Kenyans today are under the age of 35. Youth unemployment is a big problem that we have. That's one of the problems that we have. The next is that, so that's more of the kind of, if you want to have a description of the Kenyan economy, the issues that we're facing, right? Then on the flip side of it, the Kenyan economy is designed so that the two biggest contributors or drivers of our economy are agriculture, which is 1, and service, which is 2. So we've talked about the fact that for China, they would be opening up their markets so that our agricultural products can then go into China. The second one that Kenya actually is very strong at is service. What do you need in order to grow this service industry that we have? The president talks a lot about Singapore. You need technology. So you must have a partner who's willing to share with you the technology that they have at hand so that you can develop yours or, buddy up together and work for it. Because to be very honest, we are not going to grow agriculture forever sending it to the US. So it has to be a pragmatic, very balanced approach, and it has to be a Kenya-first approach. We have to look at what problems we have as Kenyans and how do we want to solve it. So for instance, I've mentioned before that we have a population of a lot of young people who are completely unemployed. If we decided we're going to focus on service and technology, why can't Kenya become a hub, an IT hub? This is what India did. When India had a huge exploding population of youth who were unemployed, what did? They set up service centers, call centers, IT centers within India. And that was one way to be able to absorb, to absorb a lot of this youth who were unemployed. So it provided that platform. Why? Because India positioned itself and asked itself, for what do we need to solve this? So what I'm missing from a lot of this conversation is, where is the Kenya-first approach? Where is the approach that is clearly stating to us that, opposed to being manipulated by others and the partners that we're discussing, what are our problems and how are we going to meet these development goals that we have using these trade agreements? So when I reflect on it and I think about it that way, that's why I say it is not just as simple as saying let's go east and let's go west. Let's go Kenya. Let's figure out what we need as Kenya. Just last year alone, when AGOA lapsed, I think it was in September, that within the textile industry in Kenya, about 66,000 people lost jobs, just with one lack of signature on a piece of paper. Is that where we want to be? Do we want to be that dependent on one partner versus the other? So we have to think about Kenya first. We have to approach different partners. We cannot shut down different partners. And both China and the US offer very large markets, right? So we can trade. We are world-class traders in coffee, in tea. We have a lot of interesting products that we have. So I don't think we should focus and say, let's go east-west. If you ask me, let's go Kenya.
Can I build on something?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And this is on a light note. You know, right now we are being taken to Singapore.
I was waiting for when Singapore would come up. Singapore is east, by the way. Just
Yes, that's what I wanted to mention. Huh?
Yes.
The president finds himself in a very awkward position because his rallying call for 2027 is let's go Singapore. And Singapore is an economy that is heavily reliant on China because China is their major trading partner. So it's an awkward position he finds himself because the Americans are wondering, why are you moving the whole country to Singapore and still desirous of doing business with us?
Interesting. And as I listen to you, it feels a bit very tricky. And like you say, rightfully, Sheila, it's not a matter of saying, hey, let's just go east or west. Let's think Kenya. Let's think some of the gaps that Kenya has, unemployment, issues of agricultural products, being able to profit the farmers who produce them. And of course, many other things that we can do as a country where we can manufacture our own products and sell them outside the country. I tend to ask myself, it feels like there's a scramble for Kenya between these two global economies, the US and China. What is Kenya's strategic value, Sheila?
Kenya is extremely strategic in not just in this region, but in Africa as a whole. If you look at the major, I think it was during the president's last State of the Nation address in Parliament, where he says that now we are the sixth biggest economy within Africa. I mean, that is not child's play. That is very, very good. A lot of people look at Kenya and like Kenya because Kenya has traditionally been a very friendly place for you to come. Now, I'm not going to talk about now. I'm just talking about traditionally. We've been, our ease of doing business is struggling a little bit, but we've generally been a place where if you come, like I said, we're driven a lot by our service industry. We have a very educated population. We make it very easy for you to be able to do business relative to our neighbors in other different places. Nobody will bring you FDI or foreign direct investment if you are not in a country that is perceived as that your investment would be safe, and that it would be, you know, that your economy is stable and it's not going to collapse. We don't generally default. I mean, there's many reasons why Kenya is good, and the Kenyan purchasing power has also been quite good compared to everybody else. And that's why I keep insisting that we cannot lose that. Sometimes when we fight, and when I personally say that today Kenya is going through an economic revolution, it is exactly that. We have 75% of this population that we are taking away their purchasing power by not being able to give them something to do, and that is quite unfortunate. The only way we will build Kenya, and that Kenya can continue having this reputation, is that it has its population that is able to have a good purchasing power, that is very well educated, and we're very technologically savvy, which is what we have today, if you compare to everybody else. So there's many reasons that makes Kenya very attractive. Of course, we are stable. That's also important to note down in terms of security and geopolitics. We are more of a leader here. And that's why we cannot mess up our foreign policy. Because the minute we start messing up our foreign policy, and then we lose credibility, we lose this. So yes, Kenya is, again, you don't just ignore the sixth largest economy, you don't just ignore the most, in terms of democracy, we are quite ahead. I mean, we saw election in Tanzania where once somebody is declared, you cannot even go to court and challenge a declaration. I mean, think about that. You think about a Kenya where somebody will just come up and say, this is the winner. Leah is the next president of Kenya in 2027. And we cannot go and dispute that. So that just shows you our constitution is stellar, our education system is great, and so we have to protect those things. That is what makes Kenya great. And so we have to think about how do we make sure that we continue on the same path and that we don't fall back. And by the way, there's been very many economies that have been doing well and slipped back just because of bad governance and bad leadership. So we cannot let ourselves backslide into this so that we lose the position of where Kenya sits, because we're a very strategic partner. Finally, location, location, location. What don't we have as Kenya, right? So we have access, you know, to the ports, we have good climates, we have, I mean, name it, we have so many wonderful things in this country. And that's why sometimes some of us get frustrated when we see that it's taken for granted. We don't need anything as Kenyans. We just need good leadership, we need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to work hard, and we'll have just absolutely everything that we need.
All right. But I also want to understand from you, Odhiambo, what does the US stand to gain with trading with Kenya? What are the key things that the US is looking for when it comes to having partnership with Kenya?
Well, ab initio, perhaps from the communication between Congress and the executive in the US, one thing is for sure, it's to dissuade you from going east. So doing business with you is, the whole objective is to ensure that you do not go to their rivals. But I want to add to what Sheila has mentioned, especially on location. What foreign powers do is they cluster the African continent, because 53 countries is not small. So they would look at the north, they would look at the east, they would look at the south, and maybe the central, they look at the west. And when they look at the east, they ask themselves, who is the leader here? That if we get them on board, then we have the whole region. The natural leader in East Africa is Kenya. And as Linda has shared, we have access to the port, which means that they can comfortably have military landing rights and take care of their security needs from the Republic of Kenya. They can also monitor the situation within the region from the Republic of Kenya. Their interest here, to put it crudely, their interest here is not trade. Perhaps the goods that we have in the market, they could access from elsewhere. Their interest here is they need a partner in the region that can ensure that their security strategy within the region is implemented in a safe environment. They can control their affairs here, they can collect intelligence comfortably, and that partner is Kenya. Now, there is the principle of reciprocity. So yes, you're getting this from Kenya, and then the Kenyan government asks them, what do we get in return? So that's now where they have to think, all right, we need a trade partnership agreement with the Republic of Kenya to ensure that this is mutually beneficial. And that is where AGOA initially came, taking into consideration as many countries in Africa as possible. But as we've discussed here, there is a general tendency to move towards bilateral agreements. And so this started with Trump 1, where we started having conversations on the free trade agreement, and then now STIP, which is what is on the table right now and has not been concluded as yet. What do they stand to benefit from that trade? As we access their markets, of course, they have access to our goods. But as I mentioned, they are not doing trade with us because they need a lot of our products. They are doing trade with us because they need our location. They need our strategic positioning to implement their strategic security operations from this place.
The region. Interesting. So, Kenya is also not the only country, that has been stuck previously between, or rather, ever been stuck between two global giants, and that's, of course, China and the US. We also know of other countries that have faced similar trade-offs, like Zambia, that debt restructuring only moved forward in 2023 after China accepted IMF terms supported by the United States, again the US. And we also know in Ghana, 2024 debt negotiations forced the government to balance Chinese obligations, this against conditions set by Western leaders. What does that say about where Kenya is headed? Because as I listen to both of you, of course, it's a balancing act, and it's a very thin one. Because on this end, the US is giving direct foreign investment, and like you say, Odhiambo says, for US, it's not about the goods, it's about the strategic security operations within the African region. And for you, Sheila, on this end, I hear, Kenya stands to gain this, the access to the markets in the US. And of course, with China, like you said, we cannot ignore the need to trade with China. So given some of the things that I've mentioned here about Ghana and Zambia, you think perhaps Kenya will be put in a position where it has to put its foot down and decide which way to go? That might offend maybe the US, who knows? But I really want to understand, which way do you foresee, as an analyst, Kenya might actually go, or the president might proceed the country towards?
Right. I think right now Trump as a president is quite aggressive. I think if you've seen, I mean, he's even invaded countries. So we've not seen a Chinese president, Xi, yet go in and try to invade any country because of anything he believes in, right? So we're living in very unprecedented times. And like I said before, if you just purely look at the numbers, then you can see that we gain a lot. And the US is not, like, Ramogi said, it's not trading for us because they like our tea. I mean, they can drink tea from literally anywhere else. It reminds me historically of, the Scramble for Africa, the Berlin conference, where they sat down and said, well, are you taking this share of the cake, or I take this one, and we name it this and we call it a day. It's neocolonialism that is going on, and that's why the lights pop up and I say, what is in it for Kenya? And you have to try and understand what is best for Kenya and what do the consequences look like. Right now, do you want to pick a fight with Trump? I mean, every other US president has tried to be a bit diplomatic in their approach and how they want to handle this. But today, everybody, I remember now, people were saying, Trump might just come for you if you just say the wrong thing and decide, I'm invading Kenya today, and what are you going to do about it? He just stopped defunding, he just defunded the United Nations, and he did all these things where in modern day analysis, I would have never told you that the US was completely pull out US aid, like in a snap, in a heartbeat, and really say, America first, what are you giving me so I give you? But that's the world that we live in today. So the US is a difficult one to go up against. And so I really don't know. I just think we need to be pragmatic. We can also bring something on the table. I mean, again, it's not like the US can just wholeheartedly come and tell you, do what I want. Let's be tough negotiator. What are we bringing to the table? And for as long as we're sitting here waiting for our lives to be decided by foreigners, we will never have anything that we bring to the table. Let's find something that we bring to the table so that we can also say, fine, we're willing to do the American way. However, when it comes to this and that, we'll have to figure it out the Chinese way.
Odhiambo, as we come to a close, what are your final thoughts about today's discussion?
We are closing already.
I know, it's interesting.
I was gearing for more fire. Look, I think there is a need to offend Donald Trump, not the Americans. We have a very beautiful trade relations with the United States of America, diplomatic relations starting from as early as when we got independence. The problem is one, Donald Trump. I doubt if Biden had a problem, for example, with us doing business or the infrastructure projects with China. If I remember correctly, he even gave us a project of dualing Mombasa Road from Mombasa to Nairobi, and then Donald Trump came and overturned it. And so any reasonable America would understand that a sovereign nation like Kenya needs to do business with as many people as possible to expand its economic horizons, except one American called Donald Trump. And so I think, and I heard you talk earlier asking Sheila, can we afford to offend the US? We must offend Donald Trump and have a conversation about where else can we go. And that's why I was saying this is a lot easier done collectively. See, if you do it as Kenya, he might say, make Kenya great again, the way he's just said, make Iran great again, and we all know what he means. He's just made Venezuela great again. But if you do it collectively as the African Union, really, then I think it will make a lot of sense. But there is need to offend Donald Trump because our interest must come first. I am comfortable with the trade arrangements we have. I'm comfortable with AGOA. I'm okay with some of the diplomatic arrangements we have with the United States. I mean, having their security operations here does not offend any of us, really. But as regards our ability to do business, I mean, we cannot delay really sending off our coffee and our tea and coffee as we are waiting for an American president to think or dream whether they want to approve a trade agreement or not. And there's a market, let's say in Iran, or there's a market in China. I think we need to have that conversation with America.
Thank you for those remarks. Indeed, a very insightful discussion we've had today. Very needed discussion. Thank you so much, Sheila Olang, economist and governance expert, for making time. As usual, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
And of course, also Odhiambo Ramogi, an economist and CEO of Elim Capital. Brilliant minds, I must say. Thank you for making time, Odhiambo Ramogi. Tonight's discussion talking about Ruto's delicate economic balancing act over China and US. Indeed, it's a delicate balance that we could not actually come to a definite side on which way Kenya should go. But of course, as my panelists have said, Kenya needs to think of Kenya first. What is good for Kenya? What works for Kenya? What will benefit the Kenyans? That's the way to go. That's what my panel has concluded today. Thank you for watching. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us and to keep me company throughout the whole discussion. I hope you have been able to learn one or two, if not more, things about today's discussion and knowing where Kenya is headed as far as trading with China and the US. My name is Eleangare. As always, have a good night and God bless you.